If you walked into a courtroom, handed the judge a single bloody fingerprint, and demanded a conviction without a body, a weapon, or a timeline, they would throw you out. In forensics, a fragment means nothing without the crime scene. But in the world of internet apologetics, skeptics build entire channels off a single fingerprint.
Contradictions in the Bible prove it's all a lie. First, God says, "Thou shalt not kill." Great rule, right? Until he himself commands the Israelites to slaughter entire nations, women, children, even animals. What did the cows do wrong? Moo during prayer?
Here's the extraction. This is a classic case of equivocation, used in an English translation of Massey original Hebrew. The commandment in Exodus 20 uses the word rasak, which specifically means unlawful premeditated murder. When God commands ancient warfare or judicial justice, the text uses its entirely different words. He forbids murder, not a justice system. The weapon is disarmed.
So here's a riddle. It says no one has ever seen God, but in Exodus it says Moses talks to him face to face like a friend. So can he be seen or not?
Forensic audit complete. This tactic is idiomatic ignorance. They are reading an ancient Near Eastern text like a 21st century literalist. Face to face is a Hebrew idiom for intimate, direct communication, like speaking to a close friend. It does not mean viewing God's infinite, unshielded essence. In fact, in the exact same chapter, Exodus 33, God explicitly says, no man can see his full glory and live. They did not read the whole chapter. Welcome back to the Bureau. Today we are conducting a full forensic audit on the skeptic's favorite weapon, contextual sabotage. They love to rip a single verse out of its historical and tactical environment, hand it to you, and call it a contradiction. Today, we neutralize that weapon. Let's get to the briefing.
But that story was probably swiped from an earlier tradition by the editors who were putting together the story of David's life. And that earlier tradition is probably preserved in one of the two references to Goliath that exist outside of the book of 1 Samuel. One is in 2 Samuel 21:19, and the other is in 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5. And these two verses tell the story of war with the Philistines, where somebody named Elhanan kills a giant. Now, in 2 Samuel 21:19, it says that Elhanan killed Goliath, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam, which is precisely how the Goliath of 1 Samuel 17 is described.
Let's audit this claim. The tactic here is suppressed evidence. He is exploiting a known scribal transmission error in 2 Samuel, but intentionally ignoring the parallel historical record in 1 Chronicles 25. The Chronicles text preserves the undamaged record. Elhanan killed Lami, the brother of Goliath. In ancient Hebrew, the words for brother of and Bethlehemite are nearly identical, causing a copyist smudge. It's a typo, not a stolen myth. Before we look at how they attack the Bible, let's look at how often we misuse it ourselves. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We print it on coffee mugs and athletic gear. Skeptics mock it. They say, if that verse is true, why does your Christian football team lose? This is contextual sabotage. Let's look at the paper trail. The Apostle Paul didn't write that verse before a football game. He wrote it in a first century Roman prison chained to a guard, awaiting possible execution. The context wasn't about winning, it was about enduring. He was saying, I can survive starvation. I can survive prison. I can face execution through Christ. When you strip the context, you lose the power of that weapon. Skeptics accuse believers of cherry-picking context as an excuse when a verse sounds harsh. But the data shows the exact opposite. We don't invent context, we excavate it.
Atheist, I think this is one of the most overlooked contradictions in the Bible for those that believe Jesus is God. In James chapter 1 verse 13, it says, no one when tempted should say, I am being tempted by God. For 1, God cannot be tempted by evil, and 2, he himself tempts no one. However, in Matthew chapter 4, it tells a story of how Jesus was tempted by Satan, or tested by Satan. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 1, it says, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. So let's get into it. Supposedly, Jesus, God in the flesh, is literally tempted by Satan in the book of Matthew. But how can Jesus be tempted if he's God in the flesh, if God himself cannot be tempted by evil? Now, before Christians come into my comments saying, whoa, 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 the James verse said tempt, the Matthew verse said test. Those are different things. I looked it up, and it is the exact same Greek word. I might butcher it, so bear with me. Pyrazo. This is what it looks like in Greek. This is the word in English, letters, if you will. And this word means to test, to tempt, or to try. You can see here that it's used throughout the biblical text within this exact same context multiple times.
The sabotage here is category error. She is completely ignoring the hypostatic union. Jesus is fully God and fully man. His divine nature cannot sin, but his human nature experienced the full physical and psychological weight of temptation. Furthermore, Matthew 4 clearly states that Satan was a tempter in the wilderness, not God. The context destroys the contradiction. To audit any verse, you must pass it through 3 pillars. Pillar 1, the historical environment. Who was the AO, the authorized officer writing to? What was the political climate of the ancient Near East? The Bible wasn't written to a 21st century American, but it was preserved for you. If you judge an ancient text by the modern Western standards, you aren't doing history, you're doing fiction.
A lot of these contradictions could be reconciled when these details are added together to make one. According to Matthew's account, the disciples left Jerusalem, they went to Galilee, and they met Jesus there for the first time. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus first appears to the 11 in Jerusalem and gives them a very specific instruction not to leave Jerusalem and to start baptizing the nations and spreading the gospel from Jerusalem.
The tactic deployed here is telescoping. Ancient biographers regularly compress timelines to focus on specific theological points. Jesus appeared to hundreds of people over a 40-day period before his ascension. Luke condenses his narrative to focus on Jerusalem's launch point of the church, while Matthew focuses on the Great Commission in Galilee. There are complementary events on a 40-day timeline, not a scheduling conflict on a single afternoon. Pillar 2, the literary genre. The Bible is a library of 66 books. You do not read a poetic psalm the same way you read a Levitical law code. You don't read apocalyptic imagery in the Revelation the same way you read historical census and numbers. Pillar 3, the theological red line. Every verse must align with the Genesis to Revelation redemptive arc. If your interpretation of a single verse contradicts the established nature of God found in the rest of the briefing, your interpretation is off mission. Let's take the ultimate skeptic weapon and break it over the knee. Lex talionis, an eye for an eye. Let's apply pillar number 1, history. Look at the surrounding nations. In the ancient world, if you knocked out my tooth, the law of the land said I could slaughter your entire family. It was a culture of unlimited escalating blood feuds. God stepped into that brutal environment and established a perimeter.
It says in Matthew 19:26, Jesus looked at them intently and said, "Humanly speaking, it is impossible, but with God everything is possible." But apparently it's not possible for God to conquer iron chariots, because it says in Judges 1:19, "The Lord was with the people of Judah, and they took possession of the hill country, but they failed to drive out the people living in the plains who had iron chariots."
This is a straw man built on a misplaced subject. Look at the grammar of Judges 1 verse 19. The text says the Lord was with Judah and they took out the mountains, but they could not drive out the plain dwellers. The failure belonged to Judah's lack of faith and courage against superior military technology, not a failure of divine power. God didn't lose to iron, Judah lost their nerve. God said, no, only an eye for an eye. The punishment must perfectly match the crime and go no further. It wasn't a mandate for mutilation. It was a birth of proportional justice. It was a revolutionary mercy law designed to stop the cycle of violence. When you restore the context, the skeptic's weapon doesn't just misfire, it proves the moral superiority of the word.
From the text. Psalm 35 says, "His anger lasts only a moment." Jeremiah 18:4 says, "My anger will burn forever." Genesis 22:1 says, "God did tempt Abraham." James 1:13 says, "God tempts no one." So which one is lying? Exodus 32 says, "God changed his mind about destroying Israel." Numbers 23 says, "God is not a man that he should change his mind." Genesis 32:30 says, "I have seen God face to face." John 1:18 says, "No one has ever seen God." That's a direct contradiction. Romans calls him the God of peace. Exodus calls him a man of war. 2 Samuel says God made David take a census. 1 Chronicles says Satan did. So which is it, divine command or demonic influence?
The forensic flaw here is a false dilemma. He's forcing you to choose between a primary cause and a secondary cause. The biblical framework frequently shows God permitting an action as a primary sovereign cause, while a hostile agent, in this case, Satan, carries out the direct temptation as a secondary cause. It's the exact same framework as the book of Job. God allowed a census as a judgment on Israel's pride. Satan executed the temptation. Context is not an unbeliever's weapon. It's their biggest problem. Because when you actually do the forensic work, when you look at the history, the language, and the red line, the Bible proves itself to be a unified, intelligent briefing. Don't let anyone hand you a puzzle piece and tell you it's the whole picture. If you are ready to dig deeper, head to weaponstraining.org. I've uploaded a free 5-point context checklist to the command center. Download it. Keep it in your kit. Use it the next time someone tries to sabotage your faith. I'm Nick Gray. Stay sharp. Armor up. I'll see you in the field.